Once upon a time, I worked with a lovely client called Ahmed. He had a productized services business. So he had services that he did for clients, but they were presented to clients like they were a product and people signed up to them. So it was very clear, very boundaried. This is what you got. It was a nice little business. Some of these services were just a thing that Ahmed would go and do for a client. There we go, job done. Can't tell you too much about it because I've got some of Ahmed's personal details coming up and he's not really called Ahmed, so I'm kind of disguising it. I can't tell you exactly what he did just in case you can re-engineer it and find out who this was. Not going to tell you, confidential. All in disguised, but it is a true story. Getting back to Ahmed, he had some things which he sold as a one-off and he had some things which were recurring revenue. People would sign up to his productized services and they would buy every month. Ahmed was quite a cautious sort of guy. He was ambitious and he was cautious and he wanted a solid foundation. You'll see why in a moment. In our discussions, one day, Ahmed told me that he wanted to set a target of all of his recurring revenue products covering all of his fixed costs. So, like any business, he had fixed costs, paying himself, because we pay ourselves first. So he paid himself a monthly amount, covered what he needed to spend in his personal life. Paying for the rent on an office, he had 3 members of staff who were doing these productized services, and all of the other costs that you have, accountants and all of that stuff that you have with a business. So he had fixed costs. So what he wanted to do was to make sure that all of his fixed costs were covered by his recurring income products. So he pushed these products more than the one-off ones. And he did that for a few months and they kind of added up. And the beauty of recurring income products, of course, is that they recur. So you can add in one client, then you add in another client, and then you add in another client. And over time, it's cumulative. If you're a business geek like me, it's a beautiful thing to see, that graph mounting up like that. And of course, some of them leave. You're always going to get churn and it takes you time to add in each client. But it's a good way to stave off feast or famine, which is exactly what Ahmed wanted. He wanted that solid foundation. After 3 or 4 months of really pushing this and selling these products to pretty much everybody that he met, he was a very good salesperson. He told me that he'd done it, he'd achieved it, and it was all go. And then we moved on to the next phase of the strategy, which was introducing new products that were higher value and taking Ahmed further out of the business so that he wasn't so involved in the client delivery. A funny thing happened when he got to this point. It was almost as if he'd got his solid foundation and he could feel confident about the business. But all sorts of other good things that were nothing to do with business, and certainly I can't take any credit for this part of it, they all started to happen for Ahmed. As he was happily working on phase 2, coming up with ideas for new products, he met a new woman. And they got together and they started having all of these adventures, and the first sort of 10-15 minutes of our meetings were him telling me all of these fascinating stories about him getting paid to drive Jaguar cars around the countryside and how they'd got stranded somewhere on a motorbike trip. I was like, oh wow, I didn't know that you liked antique cars or that you could ride a motorbike. I didn't know any of these things about him. This new confidence in his business had suddenly, I don't know, maybe it had made him more attractive. And then an even more odd thing happened, but pretty thrilling for him. Ahmed was a keen photographer and he got offered a job going to, I think it was Namibia, hanging out sort of a helicopter taking photos of animals. Now, I'm not sure I would have the ability to do that or would be brave enough, but it was right up his street. And because he'd been working on delegating to the staff and the business was in pretty good shape, he took 3 months off, went to Namibia, hung out of a helicopter, lived to tell the tale, and then came back and we continued work on phase 2. It's one of my nicest business stories. I think there's a few things in what he did that gave that foundation and prepared the ground for him being able to do these cool things. So number one was having confidence, because you had that secure foundation. But it's not just confidence. He also was able to do some experiments with the business. Some of which I haven't told you about here because I can't even remember what they were. They all failed, several things that he tried for new products. But that was fine, because when you've got that little bit of wiggle room from having recurring revenue products and knowing that things are okay, you can make those experiments, and you probably need to do 10 or 12 experiments before you get the one that goes big. The others, maybe 4 or 5 of them survive and give you a bit of money, but you need to do quite a few experiments to get the big one. So he was able to do that, and phase 2 was even better. He also, in the course of assertively marketing his recurring revenue products, was talking to a lot of people. So he wasn't just sitting at his desk making a product and then putting it on the website. He was out and about, sometimes in person, sometimes at trade shows he went to, but a lot of the time he was just chatting to people online. He was gathering people to him, networking in all sorts of different ways. And that's actually how he got the gig in Namibia with the helicopter and that. So that was through an old boss that he'd worked with 10 years ago, who he'd been in touch with to tell the boss about the recurring revenue products, because he was telling everybody about it. Didn't make any sales with this person, but of course that put Ahmed front of mind for the gig in Namibia. And the guy just said, right, do you fancy doing this? And Ahmed said, yeah, here we go. So this is why I'm such a big fan of productizing, obviously, you'll have got that by now, and in particular, building your product ecosystem of recurring revenue products. It gives you that solid foundation, gives you good cash flow, covers your fixed costs, including paying yourself, and maybe you get to meet the person of your dreams, have adventures, and live happily ever after. Want to learn more about the art of productizing your expertise? There are new videos here every week. Here are a couple of good ones to get you going.